Hello and welcome to BA Publisher Basics and Beyond. In this chapter, we will look at the triggers and how is it applicable in BI templates. So our objective is to use PL SQL based triggers inside the data templates. So before we start, as usual, there will be a zip file available to download. That zip file will have all the lab files required for your reference. So why do we need triggers? So triggers help to perform critical activities that are needed. It can be before or after the run of report. Triggers are optional and only required if there is a need for development. So let's compare Oracle standard reports to BI publisher based data templates. So the triggers in the standard Oracle, the RDF based report, we have 5 basic triggers and three additional triggers. The main triggers that are used in the reports are before and after, validation triggers, format trigger, and action trigger. So let's compare what we have in the BI Publisher data template. So the BI Publisher data template is a way to extract data from your database. So it provides 3 basic triggers. So one is the before report, second is the after report, and finally there is an after parameter form trigger. So these 3 triggers can be used to help you with extracting the data and perform certain functions that are required before or after. So for example, in case of a before report trigger, you're extracting data and you want to perform a particular concurrent program before we generate the report. So you can use the before report trigger to execute that concurrent program. The after report trigger is used when, let's say, you want to purge some data after the data has been extracted. So you can use you can use the after report trigger. So let's look at the syntax. The trigger syntax are package dot after parameter trigger, package. So the keywords are after parameter form trigger, before report, and after report. The syntax is before report, source equal package dot function name. So the same way with the after report. I haven't used much of the after parameter form trigger, but in the example that I provided, we'll have some samples to it. You feel free to leverage that. So let's take a look. Let's start with the basics. So the two key rules with respect to the data template triggers are they have to be a PL SQL trigger, and it has to be a function. The function must return a Boolean. So you got the input parameters. So before or after report function, it should either return a true or a false. So you can see the syntax would be a function after report, return Boolean. You can pass in parameters, and at the end, regardless of what it is, it's a return has to be a Boolean. So the first step would be to add the package as a default package. Second is to add the parameters as global variables to the package. It's basically adding the global variables to the spec. If you have any lexical parameters, you would have to add that in the spec too. We'll go through the example that we have. Uh, so let's take an example. So I have a data template here, and I have a default package that's assigned to it, and I have a parameter called sales rep ID. So the first thing I would need in the specification of this package would be the parameter name, the token name. So this is the global variable. So basically, this parameter will have to be defined as a global variable in this package spec. That's a key requirement. Let's take a look. Let's look at another sample. So we have a data template with a default package, and we have a few parameters, and we have a SQL statement. So the parameters are defined here, and the default package is there. So it's important that the default package should have these parameters defined in the spec. So let's go back to a minute. So we have the SQL statement here. We have the SQL statement. If you look at, there are certain things we can look in here. It's one is the how the how the uh, you can see this parameters are used within the SQL statement. So you can see that you can use a colon value. You can use how it's being used, and you have the so if you look at this template, you notice that there's a before report trigger and an after report trigger. So in case, so one thing I want to mention that the function name, the package name, the function name doesn't have to be an after report. It can be any value. So you can see here in this example, we have a before report process and after report process. So let's look at the default package that's being used. If you notice that these global parameters or these global uh, fields are being used within the template. So let's go back to the template. So you can see these parameters are used. If you look at the package specification, you can see these parameters are used in the data template. Let's review it side by side. You can see that the default package is the default package. The package is that's specified for this the function PL/SQL package that's being defined. The parameters are being defined, and they have been defined in the default package as well. The data type has to match, but pretty much all the data type, most of the data type will be numeric, but the data type has to match the data type in the parameter specification. Let's look at the before report trigger. So if you look at the function before report trigger here, um, you can do it can do a lot of functions within here, but at the end it has to return a true or a false. So the function has to return a boolean. Let's look at the after report trigger. It's a delete temp table. It's the same thing. You can call other functions or procedures, but at the end it has to return true or false. So another example for for using the template, you can see the default package is being used. By this time you would know that these parameters would be used. These parameters would be used within the default package. So let's take a look at the lab. So the goal of the lab is to take you through the various triggers. There's no real business or process behind it. So our objective is to take you through the flavor of the process. So we'll start with defining the template. So I have an XML file that points to the default package, and I have defined the parameters here. So the two things we need to notice here is one is the default package. The second is the is the parameters. So once we define those two, let's review the SQL. Here's the SQL statement that would be used in the in this example in the lab. So it's basically selecting a few items. If you look here, if it's selecting, it's a subquery within this. It's basically selecting a few objects from a tricks table. Notice there's a lexical parameter. I would come back how do we populate this value later, but keep an eye on this. There are two other, so the same package has some functions. I'm using some functions to get the additional data for the SQL. So we would leverage the same package to use to get that information. So let's take a look at the package. So the package, the name has to match the package. The name has to match the package that's being name has to match the default package. The input parameter has to match. So we are going to define these lexical parameters. So these should be defined in the package spec, of course. Then you have the before report, after parameter report. Then we have a few functions that would get you the additional data that are required. So you can go through this sample file that's been attached. Let's look at the package body. It's like any other PL SQL package. So you'd have the after report which is being used. So in our case, we are not doing any specific calculation. I just want to bring you to the before report. So you can see there's a function that returns some values. I want to take you to the before report trigger. So I want to show you how the lexical values are defined. So get others. So let's look at the before report trigger. So it does a few things, but ultimately what I want to show you is you notice that this lexical parameter LPG GLP name we are it's if you have worked on the reports, you can populate the conditions that are required using the lexical parameter. So you can dynamically create conditions using lexical parameters. So in this case, I'm using the LP GLP name. So if you look at my SQL statement, I'm saying that along with these conditions, I'm looking at this variable. And this variable is going to be truncate trick state between start date and end date based on the period name. So that's how the lexical parameter is used. Again, these SQLs, these package spec and the SQLs are down, those are attached to the zip file. You can download it and get a good feel, and feel free to use this as a template. You can pretty much everything remains the same, the exception that your variables and the SQL statement would change, but the syntax it remains pretty much the same. So once at this point we have defined we are going to define the triggers. So in this example, I have an after parameter report, after parameter form trigger, and a before report trigger, and also have defined the data structure. So once the so let's go back. Once we define the template, let's go ahead and register the concurrent program. Of course, we'd use the xdot.exe. The format is XML. We'll define these parameters. These parameters that we have defined as global variables, we would make sure it's a token. The name has to match. Then you register the data definition. Hopefully by now you would know how to register the data definition. Let's add the program to the request group or security group. Then finally run the program. If you look at the view log, you would see the detail, the values that are being passed because we have enabled the debug equal yes. Let's click on output. You can see the output of the XML. So before we wind up, let's go back to the main concepts. One is the default package. The second is the parameters. And whatever parameters that you specified in the template has to be defined in the package spec, um, and the lexical parameters have to be defined. And the lexical parameters would then be used within use within the SQL statement to generate the appropriate SQL statement. You would call, you will call the appropriate trigger function, and finally the data structure. So that pretty much concludes the this chapter. So this chapter was to give you a flavor of how to use triggers within the data template. Hopefully you would get, you got an idea about how to you got a hands-on experience by you'll definitely get a hands-on experience by going through the sample. If you have any questions, feel free to reach me out through the link provided. Thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing other videos.